Ever since the first Tron movie came out in 1982, it has just been one of my single favorite franchises. Not that I was around in 1982, but ever since watching the original Tron, Tron Legacy, and more recently, Tron Uprising, review coming soon by the way, the grid and its programs have just become one of my single favorite fantasy sci-fi worlds of all time, if not my single favorite. So the announcement of Tron Ares was obviously a very big deal for me. However, the movie generated controversy right out the gate because of the casting choices, primarily Jared Leto. I know there's this sort of like stigma of like negativity around him, and almost every single person I've ever talked to, aside from like some older folk I know, seem to have this extremely negative perception of Mr. Leto, and I never really understood that. So before recording this review, I went and did a little bit of research as to why people have this extremely negative perception of him. And apparently it just comes down to pretty much what I expected. Allegations, him doing crazy stuff like inviting like thousands of fans to an island, and we all know how we feel about people bringing people to islands. But on the other hand, I also found a lot of people just saying like, yeah, I don't really understand the negativity. It's like, you know, I kind of get how his actions could be perceived as like, oh, you know, that's a little weird, and like maybe he should have thought about it a little more. But that's pretty much all. So regardless of how you feel about Jared Leto as an actor and a person, I don't want that to interfere with this experience of Tron Ares. We're here to talk about one thing and one thing only, and that is Tron Ares. So don't let your personal feelings about Mr. Leto get in the way of your potential enjoyment of this film. That goes for anybody who's already seen the film or anybody who's thinking about going and seeing it. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before proceeding any further. I've seen a couple video reviews come out since I've seen the movie of people like being extremely heavily critical of Tron Ares and saying that it is just flat out bad, objectively not good, trying to mimic Legacy in every way. And I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, none of that is like as true as these people think it is. I'm not gonna name any names of the reviews that I've seen because I don't want to cause any like harassment back and forth getting started here. I don't want to encourage that or ferment that. So yeah, not going to name any names, but if you know who I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. And once again, I think one of the reasons a lot of people have been very critical and very overly critical about Tron Ares is because of a few things, obviously the casting choices, but also I think there's one other element. Nostalgia bait has become an extremely big thing that people have been complaining about when it comes to Disney and their franchises. Star Wars in particular has gotten a lot of negative feedback because of just how much it's been relying on nostalgia. And one of the major points I've seen from both user reviews and video reviews is that people are saying Tron Ares is nostalgia baiting way too much and that the soundtrack is trying way too hard to mimic Daft Punk. But quite frankly, I really don't think that's true. I think we all just have a lot of hurt feelings pent up from a lot of horrible years of Star Wars and other Disney franchises using nostalgia bait so hard that we just don't want to accept that this really isn't as bad compared to everything else. Okay, now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's officially start this review and going down the categories that I've listed out. I wrote down a bunch of notes so I can just sort of go through everything in a nice, concise fashion and give you all my thoughts and what I think is good, what I think is not so good, what I think is flat out bad about Tron Ares, because I'm very passionate about the Tron franchise. This first section of the video is going to be spoiler free. So if you came here worried that you might get spoiled or came looking for a review that like, ah, crap, I can't see the movie yet and I want to know about it, well, this video is still for you. I will let you know when the spoiler free section is over. I'll make it very clear, very obvious, and if you're still like, I got spoiled, that's your fault. Let us start off with what I think is one of the single most important elements of any Tron media ever. That is the music. Tron Ares' soundtrack was produced and made by 9 Inch Nails. And one of my fears going into the movie was that the soundtrack was going to be way too heavy and like way too overly metal. Because Tron as an IP is all about technology and electro cyberpunk-esque stuff, and I was worried that 9 Inch Nails might make a metal soundtrack that is just way too metal. But quite frankly, I think they did a pretty good job with the soundtrack. I quite enjoyed every moment of it. Yes, there are metal elements and metal sections of the soundtrack because that's just in their style, but there's also a lot of electro-punk feel to it and a lot of like very electro-punk-esque beats. And quite frankly, I can't really imagine this movie with like any other soundtrack. Like this soundtrack feels perfectly made for this movie. Because there's a lot of scenes and a lot of movies and a lot of shows where I think to myself, you know, if so-and-so person made the soundtrack, or if this person made the soundtrack, or if the soundtrack was more like this, I think it would fit a lot better. Or I think I'm glad they did this because this other thing that they might have done or were considering doing would have fit a lot worse. It's very, like, it's not often, I'm not gonna say it's rare, but it's not often that I find that soundtracks are composed for movies that perfectly fit the movie. Whether or not the soundtrack is good or not, sometimes it just fits. And I think Tron Ares is one of those instances. And if I were to like try and describe the soundtrack and like try and put it into words like how it is, like in a relatively spoiler-free type way, I would say it's like electronic and like an almost militaristic funk. That's like the best way I can describe it. Because the movie has a lot of like militaristic vibes in some areas. In the trailers, we see Julian Dillinger giving a pitch to a board, and there are some army military guys, and he's pitching Ares as the future of warfare when it comes to soldiers. So it makes sense that some military-esque energy would be present in the soundtrack as well. And there were some homages and like subtle callbacks to the both the original Tron soundtrack and the Tron Legacy soundtrack, which I greatly appreciated. They were very, very few and far between, that's the saying. They were very few and far between and not like just constantly thrown in there, which I really liked because I'm quite frankly not a big fan of the overuse of nostalgia baiting, so the fact that they were very few and far between and not overused was greatly appreciated. And I think this goes without saying, but obviously it doesn't hold a candle to Legacy's soundtrack by Daft Punk, because that was just one of the single greatest movie soundtracks composed of all time, at least in my opinion. But I think it very much fits for both the purpose of this story, the visuals of the movie, and overall, I just think Nine Inch Nails did a really good job with the soundtrack. Now let us move on to what I would say is the other single most important aspect of any Tron media, the visuals. From the very beginning in 1982, Tron made it clear that its visuals were something very, very special. Nothing like Tron had been done back then. It was something completely new. And I still really, really like the visuals of the original Tron. I still watch the original Tron quite frequently, like at least once a month I watch it because it's just such a good movie. But what about Tron Ares? Now, as far as I'm aware, and feel free to correct me on this, but as far as I'm aware, no generative AI was used in the visuals of Tron Ares. However, according to what I've read, in earlier plans of the film, now scrapped earlier plans, they were planning to use generative AI to give Ares like a sidekick character, but those plans got scrapped due to the controversy surrounding generative AI. So as far as I'm aware, no AI was used. They were going to use it, but then they were like, oh wait, everybody's gonna be really mad at us, let's not do that. So as far as I'm aware, the visual effects and CGI incorporate no generative AI. If I'm incorrect on this notion, please let me know and give me some sources and whatnot just so I can validate that. But to no one's surprise, and certainly not to my surprise based on the trailers, the visuals were pretty damn good. Also, something to mention here that's like kind of also important to me to movies, but is like I figured, for Tron, it's like I'll kind of talk about it, kind of not. The sound design of the movie, I think it paired very well with the visuals. Whenever like the vehicles were moving around, or were we getting like a wide camera shot of like stuff or whatever, and there was like, you know, grid technology like humming along, I think the sound design went very hand in hand with the visuals. Also, the usage of red as opposed to Tron's classic blue and orange was a very interesting choice. We haven't seen too much red. We've seen a little bit of red here and there in very like small capacities, but seeing like red light bikes and red light jets and red recognizers and red light suits and red discs, I quite liked that. It brought a new kind of style and a new kind of light to the world of Tron, and I thought that was a very interesting visual choice. And I think another important thing to talk about is the integration of things from the grid into the real world, because usually it's people from the real world going to the grid, but this time it's the other way around. And I think overall, seeing the stuff from the grid come out into the real world in general was like generally pretty well executed. I don't really have any like major nitpicks about it. There's only like one or two shots where I was like, that doesn't look quite right, but you know, very small things that I'm willing to look past, because like whatever. No CGI or VFX is perfect. And I hate being nitpicky about special effects and visual effects because the artists work so hard to do the absolute best they can. I mean, hell, I sat through the entire credit sequence and the amount of visual effects artists was insane. So that's why I try not to be too nitpicky about just like little things that are like, that doesn't look quite right, or like, the lighting there isn't quite how it should be. I'm never too nitpicky about stuff like that because the amount of work that goes into the rest of it is just, it makes it completely forgivable, and I don't want to take away from the artist's work. Obviously, if the whole thing was like, the whole style and the whole way it was integrated and all the methods they use, it all looked bad, then I'm gonna be critical. But if it's just a little tiny thing here and there, I'm willing to forgive. Also, another note on the visuals that I think is worth talking about briefly is the costume design. I think the costume design was very in line with how Tron costumes traditionally feel. They weren't overly like special or like, oh wow, that's a super cool concept, or like anything like that. The costume design was like just very in line with Tron and very faithful to how we've seen the light suits done before. And there's not really much to complain about there. Also, another important thing to Tron, the fight scenes in terms of their visuals, still pretty good overall. Seeing programs get de-resed is just as satisfying as it was in the previous two movies. And the de-resolution seemed to be a little bit more like violent and like heavy in Tron Ares, which was an interesting departure from the typical like, oh, you just disintegrate instantly. You might feel pain for a second, but nah. This time it's like, it seems to be a little bit more painful and violent. And they make a slightly bigger deal out of the de-resolutions. They feel more dramatic, which was a pretty interesting choice. And they also look more dramatic. Overall, the visuals are pretty damn good. I do not think the ball was dropped. Like I said, few things here and there, like very small things that are nitpicky, just seemed a little bit off, or like the lighting didn't seem 100% right. But I'm willing to forgive that because the rest of it looks great. And now I'm going to attempt to give a spoiler-free review and general criticism of the narrative without revealing any major details. I might say one or two small things here and there, but that's about it. I will say that the narrative was relatively straightforward and pretty easy to follow, which I think is very important in any film. The stakes made sense, the character reactions made sense, stuff like that. But I think there is one glaring flaw in the overall narrative. There's a bit too many characters. Like, out of nowhere, halfway through the second act, there was another, like, pretty important character introduced. At least important for... I'm not gonna say that, that's spoilers. There was another, like, semi-important character introduced halfway through the main act, and then the plot has to give time to him, and then the plot has to give time to some other people, and it's like, I think the second act, when it comes to how focused the narrative felt, the second act definitely felt the weakest. It just felt like a little bit stretched thin. Like, there were quite a few settings, quite a few too many characters, and they did all manage to converge right at the very end, but I think that middle section, I think there's just a few too many characters the plot tries to write and focus on and give screen time to. And as a result, I didn't feel as compelled or connected to some of the characters I wanted to feel connections to and wanted to be as invested in, because all of a sudden we're focusing on these other people. That is definitely my single biggest problem with the narrative, but it gets a little bit more centralized and focused towards the end, so it's like, it's okay, it's fine. I've watched plenty of movies where the plot's been stretched thin like that and there were just a few too many characters. I've seen so many worse narratives than this. This narrative it's not even bad. I wouldn't even call the narrative of this movie bad. It makes sense. The stakes can get pretty tense at times. Some of the, how can I put it? What's a good word for this? Some of the mechanics of how things work made for some pretty interesting scenes and interesting stakes. And overall, I don't think it was bad. I do not think the story was bad. I think compared to the original Tron and Tron Legacy, even though that's not really a fair comparison, I think out of the three films, it definitely has the weakest narrative, but I still don't think it's bad. I think it's just, pretty all right, pretty good. And one of the characters I really liked, and it wasn't Ares, although I did quite enjoy Ares. He was pretty solid. One of the characters in the movie who I did not expect to even really be as big a part of the movie as they were, I actually found myself being pretty invested in them. And I was like, okay, you know what? This is a really pretty well-written character. Motivations are straightforward, they make sense, and it all just lines up. I can't really talk any more about the narrative without getting into spoiler territory, so this is where the spoiler section of the video will end. But before you leave, allow me to give you my overall score of the movie. I give it like a 7.5 out of 10. And when you go see the movie, don't expect anything like Legacy or anything that even holds a candle to it, because like I said, I don't really think comparing this movie to Legacy or even the original classic is really a fair comparison, because both of those movies were extremely ahead of their time, and they are still, to this day, some of the greatest movies I have ever seen. So just try and keep that in mind when going into the theater. But now it's time for the spoiler section. Spoiler warning, spoiler warning. Oh my god, look at the size of that spoiler warning. That thing is huge. Okay, time to get into the spoiler territory for the visuals, because there's a lot of visual stuff that is spoilery that I want to talk about that I actually think is really, really cool. Everything I said in the spoiler-free section still stands. Like, that still all carries over to here. One of the things I really liked, one of the homages to the original Tron that I really, really liked, was the reintroduction and reusage of the old grid. The original grid, where the light cycles went at 90-degree angles. There was a bit saying yes and no, and it was so cool. I really liked that. I think that's where a lot of the like, oh, this is so nostalgia trippy, it's trying to nostalgia trip you and bait you, like, criticism comes from. But I think it's just a really nice homage, and they don't overuse it. Like, it doesn't overstay its welcome. Ares only goes into the old grid for a short time. It's like, he goes to the old grid, he meets the bit, has a little light cycle ride, talks to Kevin Flynn for a couple minutes, and then leaves. That's it. It's short, it's sweet. If over half the plot took there, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, they're nostalgia baiting a little bit hard here. But it was just a very short inclusion. I think the old grid only takes up about like, maybe at absolute maximum 10 minutes of screen time total. It's probably not even that much. Obviously, I can't rewatch the movie to check because it's in theaters and none of my completely legal websites have it yet. But I think anyone who says that inclusion of the old grid is like, oh, it's just pure nostalgia bait. Oh, they're just trying to bait you because like, oh yeah, they're just trying to bait you because it's Disney and they're a bad company and blah, 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 blah. I think anybody saying that is just flat out wrong. I think it is a very nice, respectful, and cool way to pay tribute. That's the word. Pay tribute to the original Tron. And that's it. Okay, that was one of the big things when it came to spoiler visuals out of the way. The next thing I want to talk about is actually like pretty damn cool. I think the opening sequence of the movie, for the most part, is very strong. There was this really cool visual at the very beginning of the movie where Ares was being trained with a neural network. For those of you who don't know what a neural network is, or for those of you who don't watch Code Bullet more accurately, I'm gonna put on screen what a neural network looks like. It's essentially this complex like web thing. Like there's dots on the sides and then these strings attached to the sides, and it's like the brain of an algorithm. And at the very beginning of the movie, Ares was going through training and like actual training, like both combat training and like AI training, where there were all these boxes of multiple versions of him training, and then between those training sections, the neural network that was being shown on screen would get bigger and more complex, and I really liked that. That was cool. I'm not a programmer or a coder at all. I cannot code to save my life, but I thought that was really freaking cool, because I think neural networks are very cool. That might just say how much of a nerd I am, but overall, it's a cool nod to actual AI engineering science. Like, that's just cool. Let's talk about some of the chase scenes. There were like two major chase scenes like towards the beginning, like in the first act and towards the beginning of the second act that I'd like to talk about in terms of visuals. The first chase scene took place when Eve Kim got back from the Alaska, and then Dillinger sent Ares and Athena to capture her on their light bikes. Seeing two light bikes go crazy in the city of New York? I think that's where the city is. I think it's New York. I'm just gonna say New York, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Seeing two light bikes chase down a normal motorcycle in the streets of New York was pretty interesting, and it also kind of like one or two of the camera angles, like from like a big faraway distance, kind of felt a little bit like an homage to Legacy's opening. And when I say opening, I don't mean the chase scene at the beginning of Legacy. I mean like the opening where Kevin Flynn does his opening monologue, because he talks about how, oh, I try to picture pieces of information as they move through the computer, and are the circuits in the computers like freeways. And visually, the opening of Legacy is all these like little nodes of light going around and slowly forming buildings, and then some of them turn into cars, and seeing actual light bikes on actual city roads going around the grid of a city felt like an homage to that. It could just be a cool shot and is not an homage to that, but that's like the connection I made in my head. If that is the case, cool. If it's not, still a cool shot. Also, I liked the little detail of Eve, this like super smart CEO and super dedicated, like not afraid to get her hands dirty type CEO, slowly figuring out how to use a light cycle. That was very cool. Because it's like, oh, she's not just a professional at driving this extremely advanced piece of technology immediately. She figures it out as she goes, but because she's super smart, she figures it out in enough time to save her own ass. Overall, it was like the city light bike chase scene was overall pretty good. It wasn't like, I don't think it holds a candle to the other chase scene I want to talk about, but overall it was a pretty satisfying chase scene. You know, nothing to complain about really. But the chase scene I really enjoyed, and what I thought was the best chase scene in the movie, was the one that takes place inside the grid. Who would have thought? One thing I really like about this movie is the introduction of new types of vehicles, especially the grid jet ski. A freaking grid jet ski that can go on the water. In the previous movies, it was like, oh, you had to fly over it. There was no other way to get there, or take a solar sailor or something. But not. Now there are grid jet skis, and that's freaking cool. Seeing the water just erupt as Ares' jet ski just went and going around these sharp corners as the water just created these waves and like threw off the drones that were pursuing them, like throwing off their perception. It was a great chase scene, and it was cool to see some action inside the grid. I really like that chase scene. It was good. Also, a cool visual difference I'd like to talk about in regards to the grid is the fact that there are multiple grids. Obviously, we have the inclusion of the original grid from 1982, but we also have the two primary grids that we spend time with and in this movie. And we see there are two grids. There is the one for Dillinger Industries, which is like where Ares is, and it's all red and militaristic and like super locked down and serious. And then we have the NCOM grid, which is still like very militaristic, but it's also a little bit more, it's more humanitarian. It's also big and blue and bright and vibrant and beautiful. Where the Dillinger grid looks all red and dystopian, the NCOM grid looks utopian and humanitarian and upbeat and like, hey, we're gonna make the world a better place type vibes. It's a very obvious like good and evil, here's the good guys, here are the bad guys, and it's overall a nice contrast and correlation to like our antagonists and protagonists. This is what one of them wants the future to look like, this is what the other wants the future to look like. And I just thought that was a very cool little visual thing. And the last thing I'd like to mention is at the very end of the movie, in regards to the visuals. At the very end of the movie, Ares comes back from the old grid and his suit turns white, which is really cool. That really felt like where his character progression ended. It's like, okay, he's a complete character now, he's ready to kick ass. I think when dealing with movies that have like tons of color in them and like characters have colors correlated to them, when their color changes, that's when you know, oh crap, the character has also changed, and that changes now for all to see. That concept isn't really anything new, but I feel the need to point it out because it's just a cool way to show character progression. Overall, the visuals, I really have very little to complain about. Like I said earlier in the previous section, very few small things that are kind of like, that doesn't look quite right, but I'm willing to forgive because the rest of it just looks so fantastic. And now I would like to discuss the narrative in depth now that we're talking spoiler territory and I can actually talk about the story. And I've wrote quite a few notes. I wrote these notes pretty late at night. I wrote them like the night I got back, and I didn't realize how many notes I wrote for the damn narrative. Now, the first thing I'd like to discuss is that this movie is technically connected to Tron Legacy, and therefore connected to Tron the original classic, but we all knew that already because we were talking about the old grid. In the very opening sequence, it's kind of similar to that sequence in Legacy where it's like all the TVs were popping up about Kevin Flynn's disappearance. The opening sequence of Ares is kind of like that. Just a little bit of an exposition dump, which is necessary sometimes. And one of those exposition dumps was that CEO Sam Flynn stepped down from his position at NCOM for personal reasons. And there's also this little like newspaper scrap that I think Ares was looking, or it might have been Eve or Ares was looking at the very end, showing Sam Flynn and Cora. So it is connected to Legacy, but it doesn't directly build off of their stories. It like completely respects the closure of their stories, that those stories have ended. They're just tying them in as a little homage. I don't know if I'd call it an homage, but they're just tying it in to be like, oh yeah, this is still the same universe, but it's not related to any of the prior events. Not really. Another thing I'd like to talk about in the narrative is the primary plot device slash MacGuffin, the permanence code. The permanence code is this thing that allows digital constructs created by the laser tech that NCOM and Dillinger Industries have to persist in the real world beyond the 29-minute limit that both of them have hit. So essentially, it just lets you create things out of thin air. NCOM wants to use it for humanitarian purposes, ending world hunger, curing diseases, stuff like that. Whereas Dillinger Industries wants to use it for mad profits with military contracts. As such, Eve Kim, the CEO of NCOM, is working tirelessly to find it before Dillinger does. And I can't really blame her. And it created a lot of interesting scenarios because we have these two companies silently going at each other, trying to get their hands on this revolutionary code that will allow them to change the world forever and become like the single top dog of every industry ever. Because imagine that. Imagine being able to synthesize literally anything. You would suddenly find yourself sitting at the very top of the world. So the stakes genuinely feel very high. And also the inclusion of the fact that digital constructs can't persist for past 29 minutes in the real world created a lot of interesting scenarios. Like when Dillinger sends Ares and Athena after Eve when she gets back with the permanence code. It's like, okay, you got 29 minutes to go get me this thing. That is your primary directive. Don't fail. So seeing Eve trying to outrun the two psycho killer programs in the real world and just hoping for them to time out and just barely cutting it close was pretty interesting. Overall, I think it's like a fine MacGuffin / plot device. Like, I think overall it makes sense for the story, and like Tron coming into the real world in general, it makes sense as a plot device, and I think it was like decently executed. You know, I don't really have any major notes about it. I think there are more interesting stories to tell. I think the whole Worlds Collide thing is like, I think it's like a fine story device, but Tron has always been about like doing like much deeper, more complex narratives. But, you know, I don't mind. It's still a fun movie. And now one of my like, I don't know if I'd call it a problem, but it's like, I don't want to call it a problem that I have with the narrative, because it's not a problem. It's just like a question, I guess. I really don't know how to word this. But Ares, you know, the guy the movie's named after, Ares isn't really the main character of his movie. Eve Kim, the current CEO of Encom, is the main character. Ares is not the main character. Eve Kim is the main character. And typically with stuff like this, like take for example Mandalorian season 3 or 4, whichever one it was, where Bo-Katan is the main character and Din Djarin isn't. Like typically that sort of thing bothers me. But I really liked Eve Kim as a character. I thought she was well written. Her motivations made sense. The rate at which they introduce stuff about her backstory, where she comes from and stuff like that, like the rate at which they introduce that information to the audience is like pretty decent. I think they could have like stretched it out a little bit more to like create more of an emotional impact towards the end, which I think might have been a little bit more effective. But overall, I don't think it's too bad. You know, her and her sister were the ones running Encom, and then her sister died of cancer, and Eve promised to follow in her footsteps and find the permanence code to help the world, and it's like, it just made sense. I think she was overall a very good character. And she wasn't the traditional like, oh, girl boss can do everything and never loses type thing. No, she got her butt kicked sometimes, and she got herself in some situations that she barely made it out of. So it's not one of those, thankfully. The only reason she didn't get killed in the grid is because Ares was such an advanced program that he was like, I see no reason for her to die, and I also want the permanence code. I don't know why, it's just a feeling. And yeah, people have problems with that sort of thing, but it's just evolution. And it's not like even Ares had an easy time getting out of the grid into the real world. That didn't go so well. It was a very, very tight escape. So in contrast to a lot of other Disney films, Eve doesn't feel like this super girl boss who can do anything. No. She barely cuts it out. Like almost a couple times. She almost bites the big one a few times. Went on a bit of a tangent there. Let's go back to the whole Ares not being the main character thing. It's not like Ares is a side character. He's still a main character. He's just not the main character. And like I said, I don't want to call that a problem because I liked Eve as a character, but I just wish he got a little bit more screen time in development, because he's in the name of the movie. Anyway, moving on. Jesus Christ, I've been on this topic too long. Let's talk about our antagonists, primarily Julian, Dillinger, and Athena. I thought they were both very good antagonists. And one thing I really liked about Julian is that in trying to save everything that his family has built for the past 40 years from crashing and burning, he ends up making it crash and burn himself. And that's best exemplified in the moment where he orders Athena to get the permanence code at all costs, and that caused her to kind of go psycho and kill Julian's mother. So in trying to save everything he cares about and everything his family is depending on him to save, he ends up burning it all. And I really like characters like that who are trying to prevent a catastrophe and in doing so cause the exact catastrophe that they were trying to avoid. Also, remember earlier when I said that there were a few characters who were just like, you know, like there were just a few too many characters in the film? AJ Singh is one of those characters. He's like a high standing member of Encom, and he's just introduced like halfway through the second act, and he contributes like a couple dialogue lines that are like significant, more so significant to Julian Dillinger with the whole phone call they had in the car ride. But other than that little exchange between the two, he's kind of a pointless character. I think they can still have the whole bit with like the Space Paranoids opening convention and stuff like that. I think they can still do all that, but keeping AJ Singh any point beyond that, his character doesn't really do anything. But let's talk about a character that is very important and does contribute a lot and that everybody is talking about. Kevin Flynn, Jeff Bridges, the dude. Now, Kevin Flynn makes a very short and brief appearance in the movie, but I think it's still extremely impactful. Quite frankly, I think it's as impactful as it was because of its duration. Do I wish we got more of the dude? Yeah. Am I mad or complaining about what we got? Absolutely not. The fact that he appears as this extremely enigmatic and almost mythical figure is just very much in the nature of Kevin Flynn. He started all of this. He started all of this all the way back in 1982. Everything that is happening now is as a result of his actions. So it makes sense that he would just be this extremely like mythical entity. And I have nothing but praise for Jeff Bridges' performance, obviously. Moving on, there's a few scenes in the movie, just like small things, a few snippets here and there that are kind of like setting up details for a follow-up film. And don't get me wrong, I would not be mad about getting another Tron film, but setting up details for a potential follow-up is always a huge gamble. Because if the film doesn't perform well and Disney decides like, hey, we're not gonna make another one for a while, maybe another 15, 20 years, then it's kind of like, you did all that setup and it kind of just dropped the ball there on that one. So all that setup was a little pointless. So if there ends up not being a follow-up for a really long time, it's kind of like a massive bruh moment. But if there ends up being a follow-up film, cool, great, your gamble paid off. If it doesn't pay off, ouch. Now there is one relatively major plot hole I would like to talk about. It is shown to us in Tron Legacy, and I can reference Legacy's lore because they tied this movie in with Legacy at the very beginning. It's shown to us in Legacy that programs can extract information from users' disks without killing them. Because in the first interaction between Sam Flynn and Clue takes his disc and just downloads everything on it, everything. Obviously, we only see certain bits and pieces that he extracted, but I think it's pretty safe to say that Clue, as an extremely advanced program, downloaded everything. So when Ares tells Julian that extracting the permanence code from Eve's disc will kill her, that's not necessarily true. Actually, it's not true at all. Then again, there is potential or possibility that this isn't actually a plot hole. Because it's possible that this extraction method will kill her under Julian's system. Because we aren't in Clue's reformed grid, working off the backbone of Kevin Flynn's work. Because both of them were vastly intelligent. I mean, they were two of the same person, and after Clue did his coup, his Clue coup, he made the system even more advanced. So it's possible that only Clue can, or was capable of downloading information off of users' disks without killing them. It's possible Dillinger just didn't have the kind of system to perform that kind of operation as easily as Clue did it. But that's never explained or conveyed in the movie, which kind of makes it difficult to determine which is which. So I think it really just comes down to us as a viewer. Do we think it's a plot hole, or do we think it's like, oh, only Clue could do that? I have no take on the matter. I'm not gonna pick either one. I'm just gonna roll with the cards as they are. But please, let me know in the comments. Do you think that that is a plot hole, or do you think that it actually is just a case of, oh, they can't do it in Julian's system because his system isn't advanced enough, and he doesn't have any programs like Clue who are advanced enough to do that kind of thing. Aside from that though, like I said in the previous narrative spoiler-free section, the narrative's fine. You know, it's not like grandiose or extremely deeply complex. It has some complexities to it. It's overall very pretty consistent, and I don't really have any major problems with it. Like I said, in the second act, when they started introducing like extra characters like AJ Singh, the plot and the focus, the focus on the characters started to feel like it stretched thin a little bit, but I'm willing to forgive that sort of thing, because there are so many other movies and so many other shows that do so much worse with their narratives and characters that's like, you know, I can forgive that sort of thing. And now the last thing I'd like to talk about is the acting and the performances. It goes without saying that Jeff Bridges as Kevin Flynn gave the best performance because he's just a brilliant actor. But I'd like to name my first and second favorites aside from him because, well, A, he's Jeff Bridges, and because his inclusion is relatively short, but he really makes every second of his screen time count, which I liked. Even Peters as Julian Dillinger, this is also the same guy that played Quicksilver, by the way, he was definitely my favorite performance in terms of acting. Him and his mother, who was played by, hang on, I have the name here, Gillian Anderson, that's her name, as Elizabeth Dillinger. Those two, the Dillingers, definitely my favorite performances, hands down. I think even Peters is pretty good at conveying the emotion of desperation and conveying the body language of desperation, and as Julian gets more and more desperate throughout the film, I think he conveys it very well. And Gillian Anderson being this supportive but also corporate mother being like, hey, you know, I support you and I want you to succeed, but if you mess up, I'm gonna have to take control of everything, and just kind of looming that over his head in the way she conveyed that sort of emotion and sentiment toward him. It was just brilliant. It was brilliant. The Dillingers had the best performances, no questions asked. My second favorite performance was Jodie Turner-Smith as Athena, an authoritative but extremely obedient program who is obedient to her programming first above all else, regardless of the orders issued to her. If she's given an order, she's then obedient to how her program interprets that, and I really like that. She has an extremely commanding presence, and she's, you know, a little bit more expressive than Ares, and I just loved her performance. It was great. Also, just to throw it on here for the record, I think Greta Lee as Eve Kim, our actual main character, I think she did a pretty good job. I wish the writing allowed her to show off a little bit more of her emotional ranges. She's very good at, there's a lot of, little emotional subtleties, in her face and in her body language. And the subtleties, I noticed them, I was like, oh, those are some pretty decent subtleties. But I wish the writing allowed her to be a little bit more outwardly emotional and outwardly, extremely expressive. Give her character, an emotional breaking point, if you will. Because I think that would have, suited her as an actor very well. And I think that would have shown off her ability quite well. Other than that, her performance was fine. And now for the elephant in the room. Jared Leto's performance. I will say this. This is no Morbius. This is no repeat of Morbius. And I think the character of Ares plays well to Leto's strengths. And I'd say his strengths are he's very good at being monotone, serious, stoic. I'd say that is the strongest point of his acting range. And he's pretty okay at sarcasm. I've seen better sarcastic people. Robert Downey Jr. But that's not really a fair comparison. No major complaints, no extremely major high praise or anything. It was just okay. The acting is overall good. It's no Morbius, but it's also no Legacy. And I think that's what it really comes down to. It's not trying to be Tron Legacy. And I think anybody who says that it is trying to just mimic and copy or fully nostalgia bait from Tron Legacy, I think anybody who fully believes that is just flat out wrong. It obviously tries to pay tribute and acknowledge the previous stories, but it does nothing to infringe upon them or steal elements from them. It takes a little bit of inspiration here and there, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It is doing its best to be its own thing, and I think it's relatively successful in that department. When it comes to the areas that it falls flat in and generally doesn't do as well, in my opinion anyway, is some of the pacing and some of the character development. I think the pacing could be a little bit more consistent if there weren't as many characters and settings in the second act. And I also think if there weren't as many characters and settings in the second act, the characters we already had could have gotten more screen time and more character development, which I really think that's what it comes down to, as my biggest problems with the film. But those problems do not make it unwatchable or flat out bad. I do kind of wish they didn't do the few snippets they did to set up a next movie, you know, a follow-up or a sequel or whatever, because it's always a huge gamble, because if there ends up being no follow-up, then those little setups and scenes are going to be oh yeah, they thought they were going to get a second movie, and it's kind of would break your immersion a little bit when watching the film. It's like that one animated series we all watch on YouTube, not any one particular animated series, but just any animated series we've watched that is left open-ended and there is no official ending, or certain details don't get explained or whatever. We all have that one animated series we watch that is open-ended, doesn't have an ending, or doesn't have a proper conclusion to every detail. We all have it. It's like that, and it is a little bit frustrating, but it's not it's not overbearing, you know. I'm willing to just let it go, because it happens so frequently a lot of the time, and in shows and movies, it happens so frequently that it's yeah, wish they didn't do that, but whatever. There's bigger things to complain about in life and even in the movie. To try and sum up my thoughts, I think if you're a hardcore Tron fan, I still recommend this movie. You might have some conflicting feelings, even more so than I do, because I made it very clear that I have some conflicting feelings about this film, but I still recommend it. If you're not a Tron fan, or you've never seen a Tron movie, or even don't really know anything about Tron at all, I still recommend it because it's a fun action movie with delicious visuals and an incredible soundtrack. It's tied together with a pretty decent narrative, and it's overall just a pretty fun time. Would I recommend it over any of the other Tron films? No, but I don't really think that's fair, because those two movies are basically perfect. But I still recommend it. I still think it's a very enjoyable experience. And just like I did in the spoiler-free section, my rating hasn't changed. I'm going to give Tron Ares a 7.5 out of 10. Oh, that was a long review. I've done some longer reviews in the past, but man, this one was pretty long. But it's Tron, and I love Tron, and I love thinking about it and talking about it. I love it. I love it. Like I said towards the beginning of the video, I have a review on Tron Uprising coming out pretty soon. Keep an eye out for that, because Uprising is really good. I thought it would not be that good when I first looked into watching it. Is this really gonna be that good? But then I watched it, and then when I checked the year it came out, I was like, oh yeah, this was a golden age. Of course it's gonna be this good. So if you've seen Tron Uprising, or if you've now seen Tron Ares or this review and you want to see me talk about Tron some more, keep an eye out for that video. I'm also working on my review of Tron Catalyst as well, and I'm kind of taking, you probably noticed, I'm taking this opportunity of Tron Ares coming out to talk about other Tron media. And of course, feel free to leave all your thoughts about Tron Ares in the comments below. Obviously, if you haven't seen it, you probably won't have too much to say, but if you have seen it, please feel free to leave all your thoughts and comments in below, and please be respectful to one another. If someone has an opinion you disagree with or don't hate on them or be like, oh, you're wrong because this. Try and be constructive. If you disagree with someone, be constructive about it. Please, we're here to have a civil conversation. And while you're doing that, please feel free to hit the like and sub button. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. And if you really like the way we do things around here and you want to show me a little bit of extra support, definitely consider becoming a channel member. Not only do you get access to a whole bunch of exclusive rewards, but you also directly support me in the process and help keep this channel running. But that is going to do it for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah. Have a good day, everyone.